Welcome to The Third Chair, a show about real people, real stories, real life. And here are your hosts for The Third Chair, Peter Grigg and Doug Bazeski.
Welcome to this episode of The Third Chair, where real people share real stories and share their life, and these special guests inspire, inform, and entertain us. Can you believe it? Tonight, we have a pastor on.
Does that mean you have to behave?
No, I am not behaving. I wonder if that means that we have to do the rosary.
Well, of course. And then I have some grape soda. Maybe we can use that as holy water for the pastor.
Or perhaps communion juice. I wonder how he feels about that. You know, I wonder if pastors are real people, or are they kind of like superheroes?
Well, they do wear a costume, and you must wear a costume, and as in learning Incredibles, they're smart enough not to have a cape.
Yes, I know. Some churches, they definitely have a pastor costume. So, what do you know about our guest tonight? I understand he fishes. I wonder if he eats fish on Friday.
Well, he better. And he fishes for fish. But Jesus also has some fishing for men.
Fishing for fish, fishing for men. We'll hear all the stories tonight. Tonight, our special guest for this episode of The Third Chair is Aaron Pennington. Aaron is the senior pastor of Trace Church in Colorado Springs. Aaron has a bachelor's in exercise science and a master's in biblical studies. He's a fitness trainer and an entrepreneur in the fitness industry until deciding to pursue full-time ministry. Please welcome Aaron Pennington to the broadcast. Welcome, Aaron.
Aaron, let's talk about your early life. Tell us about your family when you were growing up.
Oh, so when I was young, my parents got a divorce early on. It was a pretty tough situation where we walked in on my dad with another woman, and so I've got two older brothers, and so we were there, kind of witnessed that whole thing, and remember seeing my mom throw her wedding ring at my dad out in a parking lot, and difficult situation. And so at that point, my dad left, actually ended up marrying that woman. And my mom did her best to raise three boys on her own, of course, on a teacher's salary, which you can imagine is not the easiest thing to do. But
Right.
I still look back on those days and can't believe what my mom was able to do on such little income and with such little time. I think she did a phenomenal job. We had a kind of a loose relationship with my dad. After that, moving on, we'd go months at a time without seeing him. But then there was a point later in my life after I got in a little bit of trouble where he actually stepped back into my life in a much more intentional way. And so I've got a great relationship with him to this day.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Did you have fears and insecurities when you're young because of this incident?
Yeah, I think anytime something like that happens to a young person, it's going to leave wounds. It's going to leave scars. Sometimes the way that I've communicated is it plants a root. And being a believer, I think sometimes those roots are planted from sinful behavior. And so therefore it wasn't something that God wanted to happen.
How old were you when this happened?
Well, when my dad left, I was 5. And then when I started to probably act out on some of those insecurities, I remember just being a really scared kid. I go back now and I can kind of process through it, kind of psychology 101.
Right.
And, when something like that happens, it really messes with your mind. And so I became a scared little kid. I remember just being fearful of so many things that were ridiculous. Here's one stupid example. Somebody told me once when I was young that if I had a penny in my mouth, they're like, hey, that's going to kill you. And I believed them. Like I fully believed I was going to die because, when something like your dad just leaves all of a sudden happens, and you never thought,
Anything.
anything can happen, right? And so I remember kind of landing in middle school, and of course I wasn't processing this way at the time, only being 12 years old, 13, whatever it was. So now I can look back and see it. But I remember being this scared little boy, and I was so tired of being a scared little boy. And so I decided, you know what? I don't want to be a scared little boy anymore. So what do tough kids do? Well, they drink and they smoke and they cuss and they play football. And so I started doing all of those things. Again, not knowing what I was doing at the time, but I was trying to overcome that insecurity. Yeah.
A lot of kids start acting up at middle school just so they be tough.
Yeah.
And
And maybe a lot of kids do that because they are fighting insecurities that they can't comprehend or process exactly what it is in their minds. But that's exactly what they're trying to do, overcome some insecurity. Yeah.
Was the church part of your life at this time?
Yeah, my mom did her best to raise us in the Southern Baptist Church in little town of Paris, Kentucky, and First Baptist Church, and we were loosely connected. I think one of the saving graces of my childhood was probably getting away to some camps where I was, that faith that was always in me. I would never ever struggled with believing that God was real and that Jesus was who He says He was, and those moments where you may not have attended church a whole lot, but when we went away to like summer camps, those kind of reopened my eyes where it's like, hey, I probably need to think about the decisions that I'm making, because I knew they weren't in line with who God had called me to be.
Were those like a couple of weeks during the summer or longer?
Yeah, no, usually it was just a week or two.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I have 4 kids in my 20s, and the high school years were tough.
Yeah.
They were tough. Some of them had some real struggles. You mentioned a few things about how you dealt with fears and insecurities in high school.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember as being the most difficult of those, and how you dealt with them?
Yeah, I think, high school is when I really started to make a lot of poor decisions. And so I think, honestly, some of my biggest fears came out of the decisions I was making, because I kind of saw where my life was going,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't doing a whole lot to change it. I mean, I got my first DUI when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
Had my license for about 6 months, and got my first DUI, and then already had a few other charges: possession of alcohol as a minor, with that first DUI, I also got possession of marijuana and drug paraphernalia and concealed deadly weapon. And so out of that, I'm like, where's my life going? And there was a lot of fear that I was becoming somebody that I was not going to be able to return from.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was going down a path I was not going to be able to get back on a right path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And so you mentioned some of the things that you're arrested for, and you mentioned that you felt like you're going down a really bad path, and it sounds like you were.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 questions. One is, what would you say to parents who have kids that are kind of doing the same thing and are really struggling?
Yeah. First, don't give up hope. I mean, one of the, I never thought I would be in ministry, but being a full-time pastor now, I look back and I see what God's capable of. And so knowing what God was able to do in my life, the way that I've communicated it, I don't ever want to be selfish with that. If He can do it in my life, He can do it in anyone's life. And that doesn't mean you go into full-time ministry, but just how much God was able to redeem my story, my pain, my failures. And, we say this a lot from the church, that I'm a part of, that failure's never final in the hands of Jesus. And I would say that I've experienced that. So for parents that have got kids in the middle of making very stupid decisions, I would say don't give up hope. Don't underestimate the power of prayer. Pray for God to put maybe somebody else in their life, because it actually took voices outside of my mom and even of my dad at that point in time, because he was back in my life. But it took other voices to continue to encourage me and challenge me and hold me accountable and move me in the right direction. So don't give up hope. And man, again, if I was being very adamant about, I would say force them to go to church camps, force them, if they're under, bribe them if you have to, like try to get them environments where they're reminded that there's a bigger purpose for their life. Mm-hmm. And I believe it's found through Jesus, and I believe God has a purpose for everyone. And I think kids sometimes have to get, they have to hear it from different voices, and they have to get away. I think that's why camps cultivate so much life change, is because they get out of their normal environment and God speaks up. And I don't know if it's God speaking up, it's you finally listening. Yeah.
Well, yeah. One thing I've noticed, and maybe you've seen something similar, is it seems like, in my experience, I've been able to tell different people's kids things that they won't listen from their own parents.
Yeah.
And those parents were able to tell my kids things that they wouldn't listen from me.
Absolutely.
That's one thing I did with my daughter, is like sometimes it's like, oh, so-and-so knows this, and they always keep talking about it, so I'll have her daughter talk to him. Because
Sure.
they'll give her that message, and it's something I want her to hear.
So I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science. I used to own a health club. And I would tell my wife different fitness things where it's like, hey, if you're interested in that, you should try this or try that. And she wouldn't, I guess she wasn't listening to me or something, because then she'd be reading it in some fitness magazine. She's like, hey, did you know that you can actually, I'm like, I've been telling you that for months, and now you finally read it in a magazine.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we just have to hear it from different sources.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to go to a break, but I want you to ponder this question as we take a brief break, and that is, was there a point in high school where you felt that you had hit rock bottom, the very, very bottom, or was that a little later after high school?
Yeah, okay.
So let's go to a break. Hi, this is Peter Grigg on the set of The Third Chair. Our company, 2 Men and a Duck Entertainment, are excited about supporting Quantum Leap Recovery, an audio podcast that talks about all issues about drug and alcohol recovery. So watch for it and listen to it, and it'll be a great time of learning, and hopefully it'll help people that are struggling with these issues have a healthier life. Thank you very much. Welcome back. We're here with our guest, Aaron Pennington. So, Aaron, we were previously asking, in high school or shortly after, when did you feel like you had hit what some people may call rock bottom?
Yeah, it was a very clear day in my mind when that took place. I was 19, actually. It was a little after high school. So my freshman year in college, and ended up getting my second DUI. And so at this point I'm in jail for a couple days. And I remember just having one of those moments where I'm like, some people call it a come to Jesus moment, maybe you could call it that, where I was just kind of wrestling with obviously my own decisions and myself and all that I'd done. And again, at that point my rap sheet was pretty long. I had 2 DUIs, possession of marijuana, drug paraphernalia, concealed deadly weapon, attempt to elude an officer, possession of alcohol as a minor, trespassing. And so at this point I'm thinking, like, I'm a loser. And I just had one of those moments with God. I'm like, God, if you will help me, like, I will drastically change my life. And I felt like I heard God say, not audibly, but Aaron, if you want to keep ending up in places like this, just keep doing what you've been doing. But if you want something different, I have something different. And I left that as probably one of the most pivotal moments in my life where I truly, if you could do a 180, did a 180. And gave up partying, gave up that scene, and kind of came to that place where it's like, okay, I've never struggled believing in who God is or Jesus. So what if I actually started devoting my life to this? So I would say at that point in time, again, I just started running as fast as I could in the direction of God and what He had for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did your friends or the people that you partied, your friends, did any of them ever try and pull you back from moving towards God like that?
I probably had a few at times that were, trying to be negative influences. I'm actually surprised how supportive a lot of them were of my decisions. But at the same time, they were going this way and I started to go this way. So just with time, a lot of those relationships dissolved because we just didn't have the same interest anymore. But I still kept some of those friendships, probably even rubbed off on some of those friendships that faith should be a bigger part of their life. If they believed it, then why aren't they living it? Yeah.
Yes.
Talk about your journey back to God. What did you do after you made this decision?
Yeah. One of the first things was getting committed back to the church. And a couple years after that, God put a man in my life, and he became, looking back, he was the first man that actually challenged me in my faith. I had a lot of negative male influences growing up, a lot of guys that were trying to lead me away from where I should be. And this guy, I met him at the gym that I was an owner of, and he was one of our clients, and a very godly man. His name was John Edwards. And he found out I was a believer, and he just started challenging me. He's like, well, where do you go to church? And I'm like, I go here sometimes, I go there sometimes. And he's like, you need to commit to, a body of Christ. And he got me going to these things called Promise Keepers. Some of you guys may be aware of that. And that was a drastic change, because I always kind of grew up thinking, if you're a Christian, then you're kind of the Mr. Rogers version of Jesus. Not to say anything against Mr. Rogers. He was awesome. But it's like, I just wasn't that interested in just being a nice guy. I know that sounds weird. It's like, I don't want to just... Is being a Christian just mean I'm kind of a wuss and just a nice guy all the time? Because I had a warrior inside of me, and those Promise Keepers events really spoke to the warrior in men, where it's like, no, if you're going to do this, you need to fight. You need to fight for your family, for your faith. You need to fight for what's right. You need to fight against temptation. And that kind of language spoke to me. And so, but John, being that first male mentor, probably was one of the most pivotal moments in my life. When going to jail, that was me turning away from sin. But having a male in my life, another guy that was speaking into my life, holding me accountable, encouraging me, and kind of pushing me even at times, it was a drastic change. I'd never had that, which is why I'm such a big fan and encourager of mentoring, because I really do believe that everybody needs a mentor in their life. Yeah,
that's true.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps should also be a mentor to somebody.
Maybe. Yeah. There are some people I've met who used to be mentoring.
That was a qualified maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that there's profound... When you mentor someone else and you're being mentored, it just seems like you get it from both directions, and it has the potential to really change you. Yeah. When
you're speaking into somebody else's life, if you truly have the right posture and the right heart and of why you're doing it, it holds you accountable, because you want to speak into their life with truth and grace, and you want to make sure you're giving them wise counsel. And so it definitely is a developing part of our lives and what I would say the Christian journey even. So
sure. Yeah. Choosing your words carefully.
Yeah.
But I think Mr. Rogers was a fighter. I saw a documentary on him, and he testified before Congress, and he convinced the guy that PBS needed to stay.
Yeah. He would. Yeah, like I said, nothing against him. He's a hero in his own right.
He was polite the whole time. Yeah. But he was fighting. He explained it and got it through. Tell us about your fitness profession. Why did you choose that, and how did that go back? You opened a place so fast after.
Yeah, so actually when I turned away from all the partying and smoking and drinking and drugs and all that, doing that 180 actually got me very involved in fitness. It was kind of a new habit breaking an old habit. And the more that because I was going to go into physical therapy, and then the more I got into fitness, the more I wanted to do that as a career, and so changed my major to exercise physiology, and went to the great University of Kentucky. Go Blue. And so it just became a big focus of mine. I saw the benefits of what it was doing in my life. I wanted that for others. And so that was kind of my what I thought was going to be my occupation for the rest of my life, because I truly was passionate and still am passionate about it.
Do you still exercise?
I do, yeah, I do. I hope you can tell.
Yeah,
No,
I
I'm
mean,
just
you're in good
kidding.
shape.
No.
You're in good shape. How often do you go out?
It depends. I've got 4 kids, so it can be difficult
Okay.
sometimes.
Yeah,
but
so it's
I'd say at least I try to get 2, no less than 2, and then shoot for 4 times a week. Yeah.
Good. You've talked a little bit about the gentleman that served as a mentor after the dark times, so to speak. Bring us up to the future now. I know you are involved with coaching and mentoring. What's your thought and philosophy, even as you are involved with coaching and mentoring in the church?
Yeah, I would say, again, I'm a huge fan of it. I think people need to be coached in how to be a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I do in speaking into other men's lives is help them to understand how they can develop. Sometimes I call it foundational coaching, help to build somebody else's foundation for their life, because all of us are working off of a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not living in wisdom, then your foundation is going to be a lot shakier than somebody that is living by wisdom. And so I'm a huge fan of it. Just mentored a guy today. I usually call it coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Met with him today. I usually try to meet with 2 or 3 people at a time. When I say at a time, not all at the same time. But at any given point on my calendar, I'm hoping to have 3 people that I'm investing in, and hoping to give them the tools to also keep carrying that on, and to be confident to speak into somebody else's life. What we were joking about, maybe not everybody should be a mentor, but I think everybody can be coached in being a mentor if they're willing to put in the time.
Sure.
So it's a big part of who we are as a church. We believe that when you have somebody speaking into your life, when you have somebody holding you accountable, somebody challenging you with both truth and grace, there's a lot that I think can get shaped in our life that's often left undone without that person bringing it out of you. Kind of the I, C, and you. We say that's the four most important letters of the alphabet, or I, C, in, and you. I, C, and you. Most people just have never had somebody do that with them. Yeah.
So we're about to go to a break, but here's a question to consider when we return from the break. And that is, isn't it a little bit threatening as a pastor to be pouring your life into people, to do jobs and act in ways that might put you out of business?
Okay.
And with that, we'll go to a break.
Coffee of the Kentucky-Arizona Walnut Association?
It's kava.
The national coffee of Kawasaki, Japan?
It's kava.
Hiya!
Is it the secret elixir of the surfers in Hawaii?
Or is it the secret island recipe of Kona, Koala, Kauai, or Cola?
It's kava. Kava is Polish for coffee. And here at Kava Coffee, we focus on serving a delicious, high-quality cup of coffee in a space where love, coffee, and people mix into the perfect blend.
We value our relationships with our customers and our roasters. Buy locally whenever possible and truly have the homemade touch. Our pastries, syrups, and even our almond milk are made in-house.
So come on in, relax, get some work done. Enjoy the Kava community. Some encouraging words from the Kava Coffee Gang.
Kava Coffee.
Be awake.
Hi, we're back with special guest Aaron Pennington. And before the last break, I asked the question, when you coach and develop people, do you ever have an insecurity as a leader that they're going to take over?
Yeah. I would say there's probably a fear in most leaders. They may not admit that somebody's going to come and do something better than them. And when you're a preacher, I think being the main communicator is probably the number one thing. But we determined from the very beginning that we wanted to have an empowering, what we call an empowering model of ministry. In other words, instead of feeling like we had to have the best, latest, and greatest strategy, let's just empower the right people. And we actually think empowering the right people is the best strategy. And so we have really worked hard, and I won't get into the weeds of it, but there's a lot of things that we don't do to elevate this empowering model of ministry. And obviously there are things that we do. One of the things that we've committed to as a church is that we're going to be a church planting church. Instead of just focusing on, hey, let's get as big as possible in this one location, we don't want it to be just about us. So we want to develop leaders and then send them out. For instance, our student pastor right now, he's only 24 years old, and he preaches probably 12 to 15 times for me a year. You won't find too many churches that allow a 24-year-old to do that. Now, that goes both to his talent and gifts and abilities, but also our empowering model of ministry, where you can't develop somebody unless you give them the opportunity to be developed. Or I've said it this way before, you can't develop a leader unless you give them something to lead. And so I give him opportunities to communicate, and then I give him feedback on how he can get better. And hopefully in about 5 years, we'll send him out and he'll go plant a new church. And so I think, again, people in my position, sometimes you could call it ego. Ego definitely plays its role in it. One of the ways that we've explained ego is edging God out. And it's easy to want the attention and affirmation yourself, because sometimes ministry is so stinking hard. You just want to feel like you're doing something that's of value, and you're getting the encouragement, you're getting, the accolades, if you will. But if we're going to commit to this empowering model of ministry, it can't be about that. So you have to fight against it. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that the idea of like farm teams? If you're, for a professional baseball team, Doug's a big baseball fan. You have the AAA and the AA and the single A, and it's all about developing the young people.
Yeah.
And if they don't, there's a saying in ice hockey, I'm a big ice hockey fan, that young players, when you develop them, they get better.
Yeah.
And old players just get older.
Yeah, the way I've communicated it is, at some point, some young punk is going to take over for me, I have no doubt. But there's a little saying I keep in my office. It's simply my time to do my work, right? We all have a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity. That's all we have. And so do I want to spend my little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity bringing attention to myself, or do I want to develop as many people and create a ripple that will far outlive me and any influence that I might have?
Isn't there some kind of scripture about that talks about basically the job of the pastor is to develop the lay people to go do the work?
Yeah, it's
how do we get in this idea that like the pastor is supposed to get out there and like do everything?
Yeah, I'd say there was a lot of bad models of ministry in the past that hopefully we've learned from. I feel like a lot of us have, but yeah, you're right. It's our job to equip the saints, is what Paul says when he writes to the church in Ephesus. And I think when you try to take too much of it on yourself, I think a good phrase to remind yourself of, in my position specifically, when you're leading a church, I'm not Jesus, and I don't need to try to be Jesus. Yeah, and so
Jesus sent a whole bunch of guys out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's like I need to rest. I don't need to act like it, that I can fix everybody's problem. And I've learned to say this in ministry: it doesn't make everybody happy, but your emergency is not my emergency. My emergency are 4 little kids at home waiting on dad. Yeah, and so. I mean, you have to be okay upsetting people. If you're a people pleaser in this position, you will suffer.
Or you delegate that job to another qualified person.
Absolutely.
So that you can still take a day off with your family and some of those things can still be addressed.
Which comes back to the empowering model ministry, empowering other people to do things so that I don't feel like I have to do it all.
Yeah, I think.
Speaking of family, tell us about yours.
Okay, man, I am absolutely blessed to be a father of 4. I've been married to my wife, Emily, for about 17 and a half years. We did meet at the University of Kentucky, go Blue. And so, we really have had a great marriage, not to say that it didn't have its ups and downs. We've always tried to be transparent. We do a lot of marriage ministry together, do a lot of marriage groups. And you'll probably, if you spend any time with me, you'll understand quickly I'm not trying to hide anything. And so the same thing for our marriage. We want to be transparent with both things we feel like we've done well and things that we feel like we've not done so well. So we love doing marriage ministry together. I got 4 crazy kids, 3 girls and 1 boy.
How old are they?
Yeah, so Lily is getting ready to be 12. Jonathan is 10. Avery is getting ready to be 7, and then Madison is 4. So we are busy. We are very busy, but they're incredible, and I've heard it said you'll learn that you'll learn that it's not about you when you get married, and then after you have kids, you'll really learn that it's not about you. So I would say that's been true. It's
Do you worry about them revolting?
We have, I've had several people, ask me about the whole pastor's kid syndrome or whatever. And one of my ambitions throughout my ministry is to make sure that the daddy they see on stage is the same daddy that they get at home. And they're not at an age yet where I can ask this of them, but I have asked this of my wife, Emily. If you ever see me to be somebody that is not the same person on and off the stage, you are the first person that I'm giving the permission to call me out on that. And a couple times she has. So, yeah.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to get her on for an interview. Yeah.
She'll tell you the truth, that's for sure.
So what have you learned about raising children?
I would say, I feel like I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth. It's not as hard as people say it is, and it's not as easy as people say it is sometimes. I think availability is the number one thing. I'm blown away at the times where I just go down and I spend specific, or intentional time with one of my older kids and just say, in a way that I've learned to phrase it is, how can daddy show up for you right now? And I'm blown away by the answers that I get from my 2 oldest kids, where it's like, my oldest daughter said not too long ago, I really need you to help me to process through all my emotions because I feel like I'm overwhelmed by emotion. And I don't know if I'd have never ever known that she was struggling unless I asked that question. And I think, even modeling the life of Jesus, he asked incredible questions. Oftentimes it's just asking good questions is one of the greatest things you can do as a parent, and then being available. So I'm learning that my time is so much more valuable to them than I often give credit to. Where it's like, I don't think, going and asking her a question is not going to be that big of a deal. And then seeing how big of a deal it is, it's like, I've got to make sure that I'm devoting the right amount, that they're not getting the leftovers of daddy when he gets home, but they're getting the best of dad. And it's work. It takes work. Yeah.
And how do you handle your time? Do you schedule time to be at home, to make sure you're home? Between that, being a pastor, you said that it can be a 24-hour job, but you said you delegate, so it isn't a 24-hour job. Yeah,
I would say rhythms is the thing that I try to focus on the most. In ministry, it's really hard to say, well, I'm never going to do this, or I'm going to cut it off. I'm going home at 5 every day. And so what I've learned is to be able to, and it's not always predictable, but I know when busier seasons are typically coming. And so I feel like this is where most pastors fail, and I'm not going to act like I do it right all the time, but when I do, it makes a difference. And what I do is I let my family know ahead of time, hey, there's a busy season coming. Here's the bookends. It's going to start here. It's going to end here. So daddy's not going to be that available, or if I'm talking to my wife, I'm not going to be as available during this season, but let's go ahead and schedule something on the other side of that bookend now. So what they hear and what they see is I'm being incredibly intentional. That they know busy seasons will come and go in church. They get that. But if I show them, I call it Preface Leadership. I'm prefacing for them ahead of time, where here's what it's going to look like. Here's my plan. And just so you know, we're going to do something awesome on the other side of this. It could be Easter or Christmas season or something like that. And so I wouldn't say I schedule it as much as I try to live within healthy rhythms. Yeah.
That's good.
So I know a lot of ministers who have 4 kids. Do they teach that in divinity school?
No, they don't, unfortunately.
What, having 4 kids? Being fruitful and multiply is one of the...
the right number.
You don't get that with a lot of church planners because they're typically pretty ambitious people. So,
Well, we're about to go to a break, and Aaron will be answering this question when he gets back. Tell us about a calling to be a pastor. Does that involve flaming writing in the sky, messages in a bottle? How exactly does that all work?
All right.
Right when we come back from our break. We'll get back to our guest in just a moment. But
do you have a story to tell?
Would you, yes you, like to be a guest on the third chair?
Send us an email and tell us about yourself and your story.
And please follow us on social media.
Now back to the episode.
We left off with the idea of talking about a calling, and I know for you've mentioned to me that you had a sense of a calling from becoming a fitness professional to a pastor, but also a calling of leaving Kentucky, go blue. Yeah. Is that Louisville or Lexington?
Lexington.
Those are fighting words. And coming to Colorado Springs to start a church. And so, the word calling sounds so mysterious. Yeah. Can you unpack that a little bit, or at least what it was like for you?
Yeah, that's probably the great way to explain it, Peter, is how it was for me, because I know it's not the same for everyone. I felt like God has often led me through opportunity and what made a lot of sense, where it's just like, okay, this makes a lot of sense, and there's the right opportunity, and I take that step forward. But so I'm, in the middle of running this health club. Things are going really well. For all intents and purposes, I'm living the American dream at a young age. And I kept getting, as I'm getting more involved in my faith and pursuing Jesus more, I started getting involved more in my church, and so then they started letting me do some speaking for the youth, and then I'm invited to be leaders for camps and speakers at camps, and so it's just like with these opportunities, people kept telling me Aaron, I think God's calling you into ministry. And I'm like, no, He's not. I've got a career. I'm not called into ministry. I'm doing ministry. I'm not called into ministry. And then after about 3 years of more of those kind of conversations and more of what I would call affirmation, I felt like, you know what, I think these people are right. I think God is calling me into ministry. And it wasn't some super spiritual thing. It was more of, I feel like God's given me a gift. I think I've got a voice. I think that my experiences actually help people that are far from God to realize what transformation can look like. Again, if God can do it through me, He can do it through most people. And so I started looking for potential ministry jobs. At that point, I didn't have a degree in anything that was, Bible college or anything like that. I've got a master's degree in biblical studies now. My first job was being a sports pastor, so that made a lot of sense at a large church in Arizona. So it was one of those opportunities where it's like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I didn't even know they had sports ministries, but this church was large, bunch of fields, and they used it for outreach. And so it's like, I think I could do that. And so went and did that at a church in Arizona. Lived in Arizona for about 8 years. And then with more time in ministry, God's affirming things. I'm developing more as a pastor, developing my communication gift. And I really never set out. I never thought I'd be a lead pastor of a church. But then it got to a place where it's like, okay, the way that I feel like God has wired me, I feel like I could plant a church. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I've been starting things my whole life. I've got business background, which helps when you start a church because there's an organizational side to it. And then it was just a matter of searching, and then God, through a lot of interesting channels, led us to Colorado Springs to plant Trace Church about 5 years ago, actually. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question. What would you tell people that are struggling with something that maybe they think God is calling them to do?
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's like, oh, I feel like God's calling me to law school, or to be a nurse or a dentist or whatever. And they're just kind of struggling with that. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, first thing I would say is there are a lot of things that you can do and be faithful. So I probably wouldn't be of the theological position of God's got one single thing in mind for you. In other words, if you don't do it, you missed it, right? You screwed it up. In other words, I think that I think God's asking us to make a decision and be faithful. I was a teacher in a high school for a few years at a Christian school and taught Bible. And the kids, because I taught seniors, they'd be like, Coach Pennington, at that time I was a strength coach as well. Like, Coach Pennington, like, I feel like, God may want me to go here or go there. And I'm like, well, there may be a better choice. So definitely understand there may be a better choice for several reasons, but make a choice and be faithful. Make a choice and be faithful. And I think oftentimes it may not be a specific calling. Sometimes it is. I don't want to downplay that. Sometimes I think God has a specific calling for people, and he wants you to see that clearly. Other times I think he wants you to make a choice to be faithful. And sometimes it's just a matter, I think God leads sometimes through discontentment. So it's like, I don't want to do that because I'm not content doing that. So God leads you away from things through discontentment. And other times it's just a matter of gifting that you have. And sometimes he just opens the door wide open. It's like, hey, dummy, like here's the path. Here's where I want you to go.
Yeah, I can relate to that option. Yeah.
When you formed Trace Church up in Colorado, did you come from Arizona directly?
Yeah, we came directly from Arizona.
Was that a risk financially and spiritually to form a church?
Absolutely. So I took about a 50% pay cut to come up here and plant, to come to Colorado Springs and plant Trace Church. But it was really clear it's what we were supposed to do. My wife and I were always on the same page. We felt very passionate about, after kind of the mission and vision of Trace came together, where it's like, we know this is what God is calling us to do. And but there was definitely challenges. Fortunately for us, it's not this way for everyone, but things went really well, really fast, and the church grew. And so we were able to, get a salary that, we're paid the bills, and we didn't have to worry about, financial stress. And I know some guys do, and that's what I don't. Some guys are out there just trudging forward, and if any of them are watching right now, I would say just keep going. God won't ever call you to do something that he won't equip you to do as well, but it doesn't always mean it's going to be easy, because there's some of the most difficult parts of my life have been in the last 4 years of planting this church, relationally and just mentally, spiritually, a lot of things.
Tell us about Trace Church. I mean, what is it about? And
so
what we're trying to do with it.
So we get the name Trace from putting the words truth and grace together. That's where we get Trace. We believe that the fullness of the gospel is represented in both of those. In the Gospel of John chapter 1, it says that Jesus came full of both grace and truth. And so we've come up with our own little definition, because a lot of people like to hijack the word love, but we know that from 1 John chapter 4 that God is himself love. He's the embodiment of love. So we actually believe the fullness of grace plus the fullness of truth equals God's complete love. And so when we're lacking in one of those, I think we get sideways in our life. I think we get sideways in our theology. I think we get sideways in how we do church. But to represent both of those fully is not easy. So we believe it's messy. So we actually embrace the mess. We have what we call a messy church, and we say it all the time. This is a place where you can stop pretending, because too many people are pretending their way through life. Too many people are pretending that their life is not broken. We're all broken and in need of Jesus. And I believe if people will embrace that more, not necessarily settle for it, but embrace it, where it's like, I'm broken. I don't need to pretend that I'm not. I believe there's freedom there. There's another thing we say all the time around Trace: you can't hide and heal at the same time. And there are so many people that are hiding from the reality of their brokenness, of their life, of their damaged relationships. And so we're inviting people to come out of hiding and to stop pretending. And we're trying to lead them towards Jesus through the fullness of truth and grace.
Yeah, good. The so I have a question, and I know you knew that I had a question. I spent 25 years working as a physician. I've taken some time off, and I may go back to that again soon. During many of those years, I worked 60 to 80-hour weeks at the expense of my relationships with my family, with the expense of my health, in a culture that's frankly toxic, that believes that if you're not sacrificing everything to the cause, you're weak.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anything that I just said there rings a bell for concern, and I've also seen it in some pastors and ministers.
Sure.
I won't be naming names. My question really is, what's your thought on recharging and resting and recreating and those kinds of things that sound like you're kind of doing nothing?
Yeah.
What's your thought on that?
Well, I'd say it's a challenge for a lot of pastors. They don't want to feel like they're, anybody would ever think that they're not working hard. Maybe that's the case for most leaders. Like they would never want even the perception to be put out there that they're not giving it all, their all and doing everything they can. I've been saying this for as long as I can remember. You can rest because God never does. And if you don't feel like you can rest, then this has become too much about you. And so one of the things that I do, and again, I'm not perfect at this. I feel like I've gotten a lot better because about 2 years ago, if I didn't create better rest rhythms, I wasn't going to make longevity in ministry. And so I started putting some rhythms in place of where it's like, I know this is kind of usually a slower season of ministry, so I'll take a week off there. This is usually a slower week of ministry, so I'll take some time off there. And then now I'm taking 4 to 5 weeks off every single summer in what I call a study leave. And it's funny because after I came off, I took 4 weeks off this past summer. And I came back, and a pastor friend of mine said, what do you say to people who are like, you can't take 5 weeks off? And I tell them I don't care what you think. Yeah, because it's like, I don't need to prove it. I think sometimes we feel like we got to defend things that we know are healthy for our own life, where it's like, well, if you knew how hard I actually worked, and if you knew how, it's like, I don't need to defend myself to you. Number one, my management team approved it. Number two, I'm actually doing ministry. I'm just doing it with my family. I'm doing it to my family. I'm ministering to my family by being more available during that time. And that's going back to that people-pleasing thing. If you're a people-pleaser, you won't make it because you're constantly trying to keep up that perception that you'll take every call and you'll visit every person, and again, those people still need to be connected to and connected with.
But you can accomplish that
through other people.
Yeah.
I think, and again, I have a predisposition to this anyway. I'm you could probably see this even in my past. I just don't care what people think. And I think there's a blessing in that. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to be a jerk, right? But
right.
I don't care what you think. I'm going to do this to the best of my ability. I'm not Jesus. I'm going to take my little bit of time, my little bit of opportunity, make the biggest wave I can, but not at the expense of things that matter the most.
That's good. So 2 last questions. Well, maybe 2 last questions. First one, we've asked you a lot of questions tonight, and I wanted to give you the opportunity, if there was anything we talked about where you had a thought like, oh man, I wish I'd mentioned this, or was there anything else burning that you just felt like might be helpful for viewers to know about?
Yeah, I would say it would probably be a moment that, not necessarily a question, but I've been doing this long enough now to know that there's a specific lie that I believe our enemy, I believe we have an enemy. I know there may be listeners today that, or whenever they listen to this, they may not believe this, but I believe that we have a very real enemy, and one of his greatest lies is that it's too late for you. It's too late for you, and you're living in a rearview mirror. You're bringing your fair share of brokenness and baggage to the table, and based on that one thing, and whatever that one thing is, maybe it's 5 things, but maybe it's at least one thing for most people. That one thing, man, number one, I don't want anybody to ever know about that, and number two, because of that one thing, that whatever you say about Jesus and this redemption and this transformation and a new story and a new life, that sounds great, but not for me. And I would say that's one of the greatest lies of the enemy. And that's the beautiful thing about Jesus. And again, one of the greatest things about my story is that you just got to hear the surface stuff, right?
Sure.
There was I was jacked up, and I was making some really dumb, and I hurt a lot of people through my sin. And if God can redeem my story, he can redeem anyone's story. I don't care what you've done. And so stop living in the rearview mirror. Invite God to come in and transform your life. It may not be an overnight experience, but I promise you, what you think disqualifies you is often what God will use to qualify you. And so, that would be my one thing.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned the idea that it may not be an overnight correction. I mean, if we spend 20 years developing some big baggage,
or
God perhaps can forgive us right away, but the changes that come, the transformation may take a little bit longer.
Absolutely.
But that's okay.
Yeah,
I don't think it has to happen instantaneously.
No, it's a process.
It's a process.
Yeah,
that's really good.
Yeah.
And then last question, perhaps. That is, so you are the senior pastor of Trace Church, and so what would you like the viewers to know about? Perhaps getting involved, checking you out, sending you cards, whatever. Tell us about that.
Well, they don't have to send me anything unless it's Kentucky memorabilia, and then I'll accept it. But,
little flies, fly fishing.
I would say, we're not a perfect church, and I'm not here to sell our church. But we've noticed that our church and the culture that we've built there that has been very intentional. It's reaching a lot of people that, number one, have been burned by the church like bad. Like the stories I've heard of church hurt is just, it brings me to tears sometimes of what people have experienced. And they often relate that to God and who God is. And, unfortunately, the church is not always the best representation of who Jesus is. And so I would say if you want a place where you can come out of hiding, man, we'd love to have you any Sunday. If you want a place where you can actually belong before you believe, like you don't have to believe everything we believe to come and just listen and soak. Oftentimes our heart, the way I've described it, is like a dried up sponge, and it feels like it has no use, right? If I give you a dried up sponge, you're not going to be able to do much with it. But with time, that sponge, as it takes on new content, it takes on new shape. And I believe that with time, you might be surprised how much your heart can take on new shape. And so we'd love to have anybody, doesn't matter how far from God that you think you are, we'd love to have you come and visit and ask questions and voice your doubts. We have a clear table that we welcome people's doubts if they have them, and we're not going to chastise you if you completely disagree with something that we have, but we'll continue to encourage you in the way of Jesus. And so that would be my thing. I mean, they can connect through our social media feeds on Facebook and Instagram and all that. Mine personally as well too. You'll be underwhelmed. Tell people a lot. It's like, a lot of people think that pastors are up here somewhere on some pedestal, or they put us on a pedestal, and it's like, oh, they've got a perfect family and they must listen to worship music all day long and all this stuff. And I'm like, if you followed me around for a day, you'd probably be underwhelmed.
Perhaps you're being a little humble. But let me ask you this then. So what if, I've seen lots of different people going to church for different reasons. Sometimes the people show up and their attitude is, I really want to get involved.
Yeah.
I want to volunteer. I want to do something. What would that look like showing up? Is there a special pastor or a table or a gift card, a guest card that they fill out? How would that work?
Yeah, the first thing they could do is look at the opportunities on our website, tracechurch.com. It's always the easiest way to kind of see who we are. One of the things I tell people all the time, check us out on the website so you make sure we're not weird before you show up. Because there's some weird churches out there. I mean, if we could all agree, there's probably some churches that probably would not turn you towards Jesus, unfortunately. But so I would invite them to check out the website, and then if they do show up, we have a place called Next Steps. And so we have several different things they could do. If they want to just learn more about the church, there's a class called the Be a Trace class, because we want everybody to be a trace of God's love. It's our mission statement. We're on mission to leave a trace of God's love everywhere we go. And then, so they can check that out there. And if they wanted to get involved, typically if somebody shows up, I'm like, hey, just sit and soak for a while. You may find out you don't like us, and we may find out we don't like you. Being facetious there, but it's don't feel like you need to jump right in, but feel free to come and ask questions. I mean, you can serve with our kids ministry, student ministry, greeting ministry, worship team.
Coffee table.
Once
COVID ends.
We actually we're still serving it. So
all right.
Yeah, we believe that Jesus blesses caffeination, and so we serve it. So
Here.
Yeah. But yeah, that would be it. And we've tried to make sure that we don't ever act like we're the church that everybody needs to be at. And I look at people all the time and say, I'm not the Holy Spirit. Thank goodness. And because I'm not the Holy Spirit, this may not be the right church for you, and we're okay with that.
Doesn't mean God doesn't have another church,
exactly.
Right?
And so I'll usually recommend churches. I say that to almost every new person that comes. If I get to talk with them, it's like, hey, I'm not the Holy Spirit. If this is the place for you, then praise God. I'd love to sit down and talk with you. But there may be a better place where you can serve God's kingdom. One of the things I try to work against, it's like, I don't want Christians coming to our church and telling us how we should be doing things differently, because we've worked really hard and we've thought through why we do things the way we do them. And so we've been very adamant that we're not a place to entertain Christians. We're not here just to give you your program that you want or do things the way that you like it. Not to say we won't take feedback, because that's not true. But there's too many Christians that think they know how church should be done. And I think God gave us a pretty big sandbox when it comes to His church, and how, there's different methods. The mission and the message is always the same, right? The mission and message is clear. It's the gospel. Methods, I think there's quite a bit of room there to play.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Methods, style, those kinds of things. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there are plenty of decent churches around the city.
Yep, absolutely.
Whatever city you're in. All right, final thought. Do you have anything else that's burning that you want to mention? Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up.
I think we covered it pretty good. Yeah, I think you guys got about everything out of me, so that's a good thing.
All right, well, we enjoyed it. Thank you so much for
Thanks, Peter.
joining us.
Doug, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that does it for this episode of The Third Chair, which is called that because we have 3 chairs. Good night.
This has been The Third Chair. Join us next week. Our guest will be Monique Foster. Want to be a guest? Want to sponsor our show? Send us an email. Please subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media.